rotation should be happening around April. And I wanted to review the expansions that are being rotated out, basically the entire year of the Griffin. Those expansions were Forged in the Barrens, United in Stormwind, and Fractured in Alterac Valley. So this was a very big year for Hearthstone because it followed the Year of the Phoenix, which had the Demon Hunter release. Now, for those of you who did not play in the Demon Hunter release, let me explain to you what it was like. Demon Hunter absolutely bent every class over and made it its bitch, except for Warrior. So when Demon Hunter came out, the power level drastically increased quite a bit, which means that the following year of Hearthstone, which is going to be the year of the Griffin, which is what we're going to talk about, had to either match it or it just died because it just couldn't reach the power level of the Year of the Phoenix. I would say the Year of the Griffin ended up matching what Demon Hunter did to Hearthstone. If not, and this is a little bit of a spoiler if you did not know, probably surpassed it in power creep. And I did not think that was possible at the start of the year, considering the very first expansion was Forged in the Barrens. Now, this is the first year that every single expansion got a mini set. That means Forged in the Barrens got one. They got Wailing Caverns. United and Stormwind's got the Dead Mines, I think. And Fractured and Alterac Valley got one, but I couldn't tell you what. Oh, Nixie's Lair. That's what it was. I know Hearthstone. We also, for the very first time, got our own gacha game inside of Hearthstone. You guys may know it as Mercenaries. Before we even start, I'm going to say this because this is very important, chat. This is my opinion. If you disagree with my opinion, that is completely fair, but this is my experience and my review of the Year of the Griffin, and I'm going to try to be as objective as possible, but there are going to be moments where I do take my opinion above the objectiveness because there are parts of this year that absolutely ruined Hearthstone for me. All right, we start off with Forged in the Barrens. Now, Forged in the Barrens was a pretty cool expansion. In terms of just the overall flavor, it was a pretty notorious moment in Warcraft lore. It's a pretty big place, and I think a very popular place in World of Warcraft, the game. And you could tell just from this art alone, they went for a completely different direction than we normally get in Hearthstone. And that leads us to the cinematic, which was also really intense compared to a lot of the other expansions in Hearthstone. Compare this to like next year, which is Voyage into the Sunken City. It is an entirely different feeling when you watch this expansion. But that being said, the first expansion of the year in Hearthstone and a year of Hearthstone is the most important. The reason for that is because that is when rotation happened. That is when Hearthstone is at its peak player base. And depending on how well that expansion is, really sets the tone for the entire year. So Demon Hunter came out the previous year. This year we had Forged in the Barrens. Again, if you're not someone who's super into Warcraft lore, could be a little different. This is the first time we got to see the overarching story of this entire year, which was with the mercenaries. So we got cards like Kurtrus Ashfallen was one of them. We got stuff like Goth Rune Totem. You know, every single class got their own little mercenary. Now, this is important because Blizzard and the Hearthstone team decided to do like an overarching story with all of the mercenaries across multiple expansions, right? So this is the beginning. They start off in the Barrens. We go on to Stormwind. They get to do a quest. And then we go to Alterac Valley. We all know about the hero cards because if you haven't heard about Guff, what are you sleeping? Why are you even watching this video? And I'm actually a ginormous fan of this. I think when they do like an overarching story, it definitely leads to a more exciting year because there's people you can root for. I think one of my favorite years is the year, I believe it's Year of the Dragon, right? Yeah, the Year of the Dragon where they did the League of Evil versus the League of Explorers. I thought that was a really cool idea and I wish they would do it again. The Mercenaries idea was a really smart idea from Blizzard. On top of that, we got a brand new keyword. I am gonna make a bold claim here, chat. I thought Frenzy was the best keyword of this year. It is basically the second it takes 1 damage, it procs the Frenzy ability unless it dies. If you have a mechanic that allows some kind of counterplay, but it also allows you to like play a very specific way from hand if you have a point of damage. It's a pretty cool mechanic. And I think it was the best one by far. It was a really good starting point for this year. But I want to say before I get into what I didn't like about this expansion, I think that this expansion was the least offensive of the year. But we need to talk about what they did wrong in this expansion, chat. Now, if we look at the card set for Forged in the Barrens, a lot of the cards in this expansion were pretty lackluster. You had a couple of really good ideas, but I would say that this expansion was probably the one that was the least exciting. You guys remember these cards? How many of you guys actually saw caravans get played? I do want to highlight some of the greatest designs in this expansion because there are some that I think are really well designed. I love this card. It's not broken. It's just really good against aggro. It's whatever against control. I think cards like Condemn with the rank spells are really awesome. But then we get to like Rogue. You guys know me. I love when my opponent and me are interacting. This card was a mistake in my opinion for what it was. If I had to pick my favorite card of the set, it was this one. Even though it wasn't playable, I really like the idea of this card. It was a really fun win condition for Warlock. And I felt like this year, or this expansion for Warlock especially, was just really, really interesting. But I haven't mentioned the metagame and the cards that were nerfed, and most importantly, the cards that made this expansion, I think, a little ridiculous because of the card pool. Now, if you don't know, when rotation happens, all of the cards in these sets are rotated, right? We're losing so many cards in the standard set, which means that Discover is at an all-time high because the amount of bad spells that dilute the pool are at an all-time low. And that leads us to the very first balance patch of this entire set. This card was released in Darkmoon Faire. Even though this did not come out in Forge the Barrens, this dominated the metagame for a very long time because the cards that you can get, the spells you can get in your deck at 3 mana cheaper was really, really good. If they played this on turn 2, you wanted to throw up because it felt like the game was just random nonsense at a ridiculous power level because of the mana reduction, which led to a pretty unfun metagame. And this actually lasted for a very long time. We also got this card nerfed, which ended up being really, really powerful because it turned out for 2 mana, summoning 3 secrets from your deck and also doing 3 damage was great. This card got nerfed. It was very, very good. But more importantly, talking about cards that were actually released in this set, the Watch Post. Both of these cards dominated the format. This card in itself just single-handedly won you games. So after that metagame, we kind of saw a little bit of a different metagame, obviously because some of the main reasons why the first initial metagames was just absolutely ridiculous got nerfed and completely changed. Or we started to see, which is going to be the common pattern of this year, chat. Did you guys know that mana cheating is really good in Hearthstone? Refreshing Springwater, which was one of the powerful cards for Mage, got finally a 1 mana increase so that this card wouldn't just draw you 2 cards for free. You'd at least have to spend a singular mana on this card. But this doesn't mention the Encounters Flow interaction. We'll get there very soon. First day of school, they changed it because again, mana cheating and generating cards is very good. Remember Conviction, guys? Conviction was fun too. Hysteria was a 3 mana, one of the greatest cards of all time. Mancrick was a very good card. You saw Mancrick in virtually every single deck because if you high rolled the 3/10, it was miserable for your opponent to deal with, right? So they ended up nerfing it to a 3/7. At this point in time, a lot of the metagame was nerfed, right? A lot of the new exciting cards were nerfed, except for one class, chat, which was Rogue. This card, for those of you who don't know, was 2 mana. It was 2 mana Frenzy, reduce the cost of your cards in your hand by 1. As you could probably guess, what did I say earlier, chat? The theme of this year, mana cheating is very good. And because it had field contact for a draw engine, you would fill your hand up, you would get the Octobot, you would just kill your opponent in 1 turn because they basically made a better eviscerate as the game goes on with the rank spells. On top of this year, I haven't even mentioned the most important thing here was the core set. Blizzard got rid of the classic set from the standard pool, right? It's no longer an entire baseline of cards. They introduced what is basically the core set, which is a rotating set for the standard year that is completely free for players. But in that set of cards, they did have they had this card. So Rogue had the ability to basically discount this card and kill you. The main deck that saw play after that big change was Priest. Priest got this card in Ash of Outlands. This card basically allowed you to play what we like to call Discover Priest, which was a control deck that would just discover answers and it would lead games to be like 45 minutes. And I remember that metagame, it was miserable. You could use Renew to discover the Renew, like another Renew. And that was a chain that led to a lot of unfortunate moments. And then they changed it, is that they made it so you can no longer discover the same card cast from a Discover card. Then we are led to the next important moment in the year of the Gryphon, which is the first mini set of the year, which was Wailing Caverns. Wailing Caverns was a pretty impactful mini set. For the first time in a very long time, Blizzard decided to print a way to interact with our hand or your opponent's hand with this card. Mutinous was a very, very good card. Shaman got this card, which was the Wailing Vapor. Elemental Shaman ended up being actually pretty decent. On top of this card was arguably the most important card for Shaman this entire year, which was the Primal Dungeoneer. Shaman got a pretty good mini set overall. I think the most impactful card though, which we'll start to see later on, chat, what is the theme of this year? For 500 points is this card. Again, the common theme here is 2 less. Mana cheating, very good. But I think overall, after the Wailing Caverns was released, we saw a couple more nerfs, right? They changed first day of school again. Then we get probably the coolest change ever, or not the coolest change, but one of the most important moments of Hearthstone history, chat, which is this card right here. This card started off at 4 mana, and this changed Wild entirely because this was a card that basically broke the format, which forced the developers to ban the card in Wild. It was kind of a really good moment because it set that bar of like, okay, if something is so problematic in Wild, we will ban that card. At this time, right after the Wailing Caverns came out, Priest was still really good because of one card in particular, which was Apotheosis. Again, another card from the previous year that allowed Priest to get to the late game so prominently because of one card I still haven't mentioned yet. Chat, what card is it? This card. Okay. Now, this was the poster child for Frenzy. Really, really cool card. But when it worked with Apotheosis, it basically led to a moment of a Reno Jackson moment in Standard without building Highlander. So remember at the start of this expansion, I was talking about how there's no bad cards in the pool at the start of rotation. This card allowed Priest to generate more renews, which led to a lot of moments where like you were just generating renews off wand makers, which was frustrating. So they finally nerfed renew to 2 mana. Really impactful change. Priest got hit really hard here because like they were tired of games lasting for that long. By the way, let me know if you guys want me to do a review of every single year, because this is kind of interesting. But I believe that was the last patch notes in Forge of the Barrens. This set the tone for the year, chat. Again, I don't think this was nearly as cool as I would say a first expansion needs to be. And that's my biggest criticism for Forge in the Barrens. Mana cheating was at an all-time high. There was a lot of frustrating polarizing moments, right? And like I said, the first expansion of the year really dictates how people feel about the entire year overall. And I'll give you a really good example of this. And it's one of the reasons why I think Ungoro was the best expansion Hearthstone ever made, was because Ungoro was a really impactful set. It was very fun. It was super flavorful. It set the tone for that year. Or Forge of the Barrens, as much as it's not like a super offensive expansion compared to the other ones in this year, it just wasn't very exciting. And as a content creator during that time, I felt that a lot. I could tell in viewership that people just weren't really excited for Forged in the Barrens. Out of like a 10, I would probably give Forged in the Barrens like a 5 out of 10, which leads us into my most hated expansion of all time, United in Stormwind. There is multiple reasons why this expansion was really impactful to the metagame in such a way that I believe, if we looked it up, this expansion made the fastest average Hearthstone game of all time. Games were over on turn 4, turn 5, very consistently. This had our mercenaries go to Stormwind after Barrens. Now, if you don't know World of Warcraft, I at least know a little bit here, is that Barrens is kind of one of the first leveling grounds of the Horde in Warcraft. So Stormwind was like the continuation of that. They're leveling up, they're getting stronger, they're going to Stormwind. I don't know, the vibe was fine. Stormwind's kind of cool. This expansion was more exciting than Forge of the Barrens, right? They showed Seek Guidance, and this was the main draw for Unite and Storm, which was a quest line. Now, I want to talk about flavor for a second. And for those of you who know me, flavor is a really big deal to me. I love flavor. This was really cool. Okay. The idea of quest lines, in theory, in terms of flavor, is a really cool idea in terms of leveling up your mercenaries, right? You get a very powerful thing. And that thing was the very first time we, I guess in a while, we saw the line destroy the enemy hero, right? This quest broke people's mind. Really exciting card. And they did this intentionally, by the way, because I think they realized from Forge of the Barrens, there wasn't enough hype. So they're like, let us release the arguably the most interesting card in terms of just text to our players the very first day to hype them up. They also introduced the tradable keyword. Now, the tradable keyword, I think, was arguably the most impactful mechanic of the year. It made tech cards actually playable. If this card didn't have tradable in it, I don't think it would have been ran, but because it had tradable on the card, and if you don't know what tradable is, you can basically pay 1 mana to drag it over your deck and get another card. It's like a 1 mana cycle if you don't need that card. It allowed cards that usually would be unplayable to be playable. They also introduced the professional tools, which some of them were just straight up interesting. Like Kodo Mount was a pretty decent card, right? Some of them were like this, which even after it got buffed, it still didn't see play. But what did I say at the start of this year? I'm gonna keep going back to this, right? What was basically the tone of this year? Mana cheating is really good. And they saw that and they said to themselves, let's have some more mana cheating. The starting mana cost for this card, it has the exact same text, was 3 mana. It turns out that if you could reduce your whole hand twice with the amount of draw that Warlock has, it was broken. So over I want to say up until the current year we're in, right? They ended up nerfing this card twice to 5 mana and it's still playable at 5. This card turned out to be arguably one of the strongest cards of the set and was one of the reasons why games would end so fast. This card single-handedly allowed any board-centric deck that was aggressive to have a huge payoff and just win games on turn 5 consistently. Even nerfing it from 5 to 6 didn't really solve the issue. It was still very playable, but you'll notice over this entire year, a lot of the cards that were good were either A, cheating mana, or B, had a very ridiculous effect that would single-handedly win you the game. Let's start off with the card that I thought was going to be the best card of this year, which was a quest line. This was a good card. Okay. This was, I saw the Demon Seed and I said to myself, this card is going to break the game because what you get at the end of this is the battle cry for the rest of the game. Damage you take on your turn damages your opponent instead. And this is where we end up basically starting the main identity of this expansion of, if you don't kill me, I'm gonna kill you. Okay, this card fundamentally changed the way Hearthstone is played. It was banned in Wild. I want to compliment this card. I think this card is awesome. We've never seen an effect like this ever in Hearthstone, and it's really interesting that the designers came up with a card that was like, pretend you're another class, and it was one of the highlights of the set. I want to talk about probably the card I hated the most from this set, which was Sorcerer's Gambit. This is the fundamental issue with almost all of the quest lines, is that after you completed the quest lines, it fundamentally changed the game. You'll notice, and if you go look at Hearthstone history over the years, that as soon as you play a card that fundamentally changes the game after it's played, it usually makes the game just not fun for someone. I talked about Celestial Alignment. Celestial Alignment was a really big problem, and it was a really big offender of this, is that after that card was played, before it was nerfed, it basically changed the game and it made the game unfun for someone, right? This was the same philosophy. This card used to say spell damage +3. After this card was played, it just felt miserable. And this wasn't the only offender of this. The Hunter questline ended up being almost the exact same thing, right? The ability to just, for the rest of the game, spells you cast refresh your hero power. Oh my God, absolutely miserable. Almost every single questline had a problem except for like the Druid one and the Rogue one, right? Guff just had a very powerful effect, but it wasn't like after this card is played, you're done. I hated this expansion. And I remember that this led me to my moment that I was so excited for Hearthstone Mercenaries. I would give this expansion probably a 2 out of 10. So Enchantress Flow at this time, chat, at the time United Stormwind was released, this card was still 2 mana. This card was still 2 mana, dude. Like, look how many, this is the first patch of the expansion, by the way. Look how many nerfs there are. This is the second patch. This card was still in the game, by the way. You know what? I'm gonna take it back. This expansion was a 10 out of 10 because the diversity of the amount of ways you can kill your opponent was phenomenal. This is where I stopped playing the game. I'm already not feeling pretty optimistic about Hearthstone after United Stormwind, at least standard, right? But I was really excited for Mercenaries. Now, chat, I want to talk about why I was excited for Mercenaries more than a lot of other people. When Mercenary was announced, I was really excited for it because it was a break from standard. And I knew that at least people would watch Mercenaries because it's still Hearthstone related, where if I went to like a different game, the viewership would drop significantly, right? And I was a pretty small creator at this time. And when Mercenaries came out, it was probably the biggest flop Hearthstone's ever done. Think about how insane it would have been if they just been Slay the Spire in Hearthstone, bro. Oh my God, it would have been amazing. It would have been so good. That being said, I was still optimistic on the game mode. For the first month, this game was pretty fun. It was fun doing the quest lines. It was fun. PvP in this game mode for the first month was so good, dude. I loved PvP in this game mode because I didn't feel like I was getting absolutely railed every game, right? It was there was so much thought process in terms of just how you want to done the PvP. The way that you ended up, you know, grinding mercenaries the fastest was you go to like the first zone and then you would find the mysterious stranger. The mysterious stranger would give you a task for one of your mercenaries and you just min-max that. They changed it. I think that was the beginning of the end for the game mode. It basically killed the game mode. Like if you weren't paying money and you weren't playing it every single day, you were just basically fucked. Like you couldn't play the game. I don't remember what happened in standard after this game mode came out because I did not play standard Hearthstone after mercenaries came out. Eventually they ended up doing the Dead Mines mini set. Oh, we also got Diablo in Battlegrounds, by the way. That was fun. People thought that, you know, Dead Mines was going to change the game significantly, right? For Hearthstone, right? Because people were so tired of dying early on to just absolute nonsense, right? They released this card and this card was 6 mana at the time. Yeah, it kind of killed people too. So unfortunately for the Dead Mines mini set, I wouldn't say that it really changed the game at all. If you already are not a fan of what the expansion brought to the game, you probably still hated it for the most part. But the main thing here was that Pirate Warrior started to see play because they also printed this card. I think a lot of people could probably say that they weren't big fans of Pirate Warrior because it was the face roll deck. It was probably the easiest Hearthstone deck ever to play if you wanted to win at a pretty high level. I'm gonna move on from United Stormwind. I think this is just getting depressing. How could they follow United and Stormwind? How could they even match the quality of games that we had in United and Stormwind? And dude, somehow, dude, they matched exactly what it was in United and Stormwind. You were still dying really early on because they released cards that were absolutely bonkers. My favorite thing about this expansion, and I don't know why they stopped doing it, was that they allowed you to pick a side when you logged in that day. You got to pick Alliance, you got to pick Horde. I don't know which ones you guys picked, but that was so cool. I think the trailer, by the way, is so good. The trailer is awesome. Now, the keyword was honorable kill, which is deal exact lethal damage to get a bonus. I would say that this was the weakest keyword of the entire year. And I think the problem with it is like, it's too specific. We also got these like really interesting spells, which were things that would proc over multiple turns that you didn't have to pay additional mana for after you got it. So like they made this card to fit into Big Mage. The Shaman was probably the best one that we saw, which was this one, right? This one was good. I don't know how you guys find hero cards. Hero cards are like, they're questionable because if a hero card is too good, it's the same issue as the quest lines, right? Where like it fundamentally changes the game after it's finished, right? Or after you play the card. So this is the final form of the mercenaries of this year, chat. But this card is fine because after it's not like the worst case offender because after this card is played, yeah, you're obviously a better hero and you have a better hero power, but it's not like broken, right? This is the biggest offender out of all of them. Setting your maximum mana to 20 is absolutely ridiculous. This card used to be 7 mana and it's mainly because of this thing right here. This is also a really, really good card. This is probably what I would describe as probably the second best hero card after Guff. There was one card in the game that kind of absolutely railed the metagame at the start. So this card used to say, after your opponent casts the spell, summon a copy of this. It didn't say summon another IMD Trog, meaning if you couldn't kill this card on turn 1, this card single-handedly won you the game. We're gonna talk about the first patch notes for this game because it really showcases to you what the metagame was like right at the start. So again, we got hero cards, we got honorable kill, but what ended up seeing the most play here was cards from a previous expansion and kind of showcasing how good mana cheating is. So we saw that Celestial Alignment, even though it was a card released from 2 expansions previous, because it fundamentally changed the game, an insane amount of mana cheating for Druid got nerfed. This card ended up getting nerfed because again, mana cheating was absolutely ridiculous, dude. Oh my God, mana cheating is insane. This card used to be 5 mana. You could probably imagine. Now there were ways to copy it because of that freaking bird that came in Dead Mines. Mythalrod got its second nerf during this set. You could see that all of these cards from previous expansions started to getting nerfed because, you know, they were really, really powerful. I want to take a moment, by the way, because some of you guys may not know this. This card chat saw play in 2 world championships 1 year from each other. Think about how crazy that is. 1 year difference, and it still ended up being absolutely ridiculous. And then we move on to the next one. Chat, this is 1 month after, by the way, but I remember one card being extremely good. Do you guys remember what card was extremely good during this time? And just like Il'gynoth, this card was seeing play basically for 2 world championships. Pirate Warrior ended up getting nerfed because, again, it was so popular, it was very good that they had to make it a little less good. Enchantress Flow finally got nerfed again. This card finally was dead. This card lasted for 2 years, guys. Wait, was that the last one? Oh my God. Now, the mini set was very impactful. First and foremost, I have to shout them out again. The art team in Hearthstone, banging, bro. Insanely good trailer. This mini set was really good. It allowed, I want to say, one of the most interesting ways of playing Hearthstone in a very long time, which was Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan was basically bringing duels treasures into standard. And if you guys don't remember that, it was ridiculous. And the entire metagame changed to basically players playing Kazakhstan. And regardless of how you feel about that card, it is nice to have new cards added into Hearthstone and the game play out entirely different. This is a really impactful set. And again, I want to kind of highlight Kazakhstan because even though it was a very powerful card, at least it was not dying on turn 4 or 5, right? At least it was something completely different. So I think Anixia's Lair was honestly pretty great for the game. I would give Alterac Valley, including the mini set, probably like a 5 again, right? It was a pretty crazy year for Hearthstone, chat. I want to take this moment to talk about what we can learn from this year, what at least I think was the most important moments of this year, what the designers can take from this year, and basically what things they should continue doing. My number one thing would be do overarching storylines more consistently. I love the idea of having characters that connect the entire expansion lore together, right? Is there anything else I really liked about this year? Don't do mercenaries again. If you're gonna do another game mode for Hearthstone, make sure you actually make a game mode that people want to play. Overall, I say, like, make sure the game is not as fast paced. Mana cheating, keep it to a minimum. Don't make it super aggressive. I hope they learned a lot from this year. Also, if you like this, make sure you subscribe. Like the video. It helps me out a ton. I appreciate it. Oh, dude, that's so gross.